This is your Learn recording for measuring electricity, Ohm's law, and formula triangles. By watching this video, a student will be able to successfully meet the following learning objectives. I can explain how electricity is measured. I can calculate the solution using Ohm's law and/or a formula triangle. What is the relationship between amps, volts, and watts? We can use the formula triangle to determine the relationship between amperes, volts, and watts, or current, voltage, and wattage. If we want to know what watts is equal to, we can cover up watts, and then watts is equal to what we see. We see volts next to amps. That means watts equals volts times amps. If we want to know what volts is equal to, we can cover up volts, and we see volts equals watts divided by amps. Watts over amps. So A was correct. Watts equals volts times amps. B is correct. Volts equals watts divided by amps. Let's see what amps is equal to. If we cover up amps, what do we see? We see watts over volts. That means watts divided by volts. Amps equals watts divided by volts. C is correct as well. These are the relationships written 3 different ways between current, voltage, and watts. We can use a formula triangle to solve any question asking about watts, volts, amps, or wattage, voltage, and current. If we have 2 knowns, we can solve for the third unknown. The one thing we want to remember is wattage is measured in the unit watts and abbreviated with the letter W. Voltage is measured in the unit volts and abbreviated with the letter V. The tricky one is current. Current is measured in the unit amperes or amps, and it's abbreviated with the letter I. So that's the tricky one. It says you have a voltage of 120 volts entering your house and a light bulb with 125 amperes or amps flowing through it. How many watts is your light bulb? Well, to get the equation to find watts, you cover up what you need to find for your answer. I need to find watts for my answer. So watts equals volts times amps. And that means watts equals 120 volts times 1.25 amps. And that's going to give me my answer in watts. That's how I use my formula triangle to solve for how many watts my light bulb is. And when I multiply 120 volts times 1.25 amps, I find out my light bulb is 150 watts. What is the relationship between current, volts, and resistance? Let's find out which selection is correct. Remember, I is current, measured in the unit amps. Resistance is represented with the letter R or the unit ohms. If we want to know if A is correct, volts equals I times R, we can cover up V. What do we see? Well, we see I times R. If they're next to each other on the same level, that means we multiply them. So volts does equal current times resistance. Is B correct? Does resistance equal current times volts? Well, if we cover up resistance, what do we see? We see volts divided by current. So current divided by volts is not correct. B is not going to work. If we cover up current, what do we see? Well, we see volts divided by resistance. And C says current equals resistance times volts. That's not correct. So C is not correct. A is the only correct choice here. That's the relationship between current, volts, and resistance. There are other correct relationships, they just were not a choice. Other correct relationships are, for example, I equals volts divided by R. All right, let's try a problem. If a 3 ohm wire is connected to a 12 volt battery, what will the current be? Okay, so we need to solve for current. If we cover up current, we can find our equation to solve for current. You cover up the answer you need to find, and we see that current equals volts divided by resistance. So current equals 12 volts divided by 3 ohms. And 12 divided by 3 gives us 4, and the unit for current is amps. So if we have a 3 ohm wire connected to a 12 volt battery, our current is 4 amps. And there we see it right there. That's how you use a formula triangle. You cover up what you need to find, and the remaining, what you see remaining, is how you solve for your answer. After watching this video, a student can successfully meet the following learning goals. You can now calculate the solution using Ohm's law and/or a formula triangle and measure electricity.